She built a life to forget who she used to be. But when the man who once saved her life is brought in dying, she has to choose stay invisible or become that person again. As enemies close in and secrets unravel, this isn't just about survival. It's about identity, loyalty, and the cost of walking away from who you truly are.
Colonel Vance brought his hand crashing down on the administrator's desk. The coffee mug on it leaped into the air and shattered on the floor. "I do not care about your procedures," he snarled, his voice low and threatening. "You have 4 minutes to move every civilian out of this emergency room, or I will do it for you." The administrator, a man unaccustomed to such a tone for 30 years, took a step back. Outside, 8 military helicopters were already on the ground. Soldiers in full gear were now moving down the hospital hallways. And somewhere in this building was the most honored combat medic America had ever known. She was praying they would not be able to find her. If your own heart is beating faster right now, please subscribe and follow this amazing story. Tell me what city you are watching from in the comments. I am curious to see how far this story will reach. Now, let us return to the beginning. Flora Montgomery followed a very rigid schedule. Every evening, she got to St. Jude Medical Center at 10:45, right before her shift was about to begin. She always parked her car in the same space at the back of the parking area. She used a side entrance to clock in, and she spoke fewer than 6 words to anyone. She enjoyed the peace and quiet. Her goal was to be predictable, silent, and totally unseen. She was a master of being ignored. Her locker was number 47, located in the 3rd row of the staff changing room. Inside, she kept 2 spare uniforms, a protein bar she was saving, and a very small photograph. It was hidden behind a piece of metal, out of view. She was the only person who knew the picture was there. She had not even glanced at it in almost a full year. But she could not bring herself to get rid of it. Some memories stay with you, even if they cause you pain. Flora changed into her work clothes, avoiding her own image in the process. She did not look at her reflection anymore. She tied her hair back very tightly. A couple of strands always seemed to work their way loose and hang around her face. It was a habit of hers to pull her sleeves down to cover her wrists. She made sure they were always completely hidden, both of them. "Montgomery." A sharp voice cut through the quiet of the locker room. She turned around. The head nurse, Deborah Sims, stood there holding a clipboard. She already seemed irritated. Deborah was 53 years old and had a personality as cutting as a scalpel. She had zero tolerance for what she considered inefficiency, which she felt described most of her colleagues. "Barnes called in sick again," Deborah announced without emotion. "That is 3 times this month. You will be working triage tonight." Flora simply blinked. Okay. Deborah looked like she was expecting more. "You are not going to complain? Or ask for more money? You are not even going to argue?" "No." Deborah studied her for another second. "Fine. You are a very strange woman, Montgomery." She turned on her heel and departed. Flora nearly let a small smile show. Nearly. Triage duty on a Thursday night in Oregon was usually not very exciting. It was mostly a series of twisted ankles and chest pains that were just anxiety attacks. Flora took care of each patient with a steady and soothing manner. Her voice never wavered, and her hands never shook. She had learned the skill of keeping her hands steady a very long time ago, in a place that was very different from here. By midnight, the emergency room was starting to fill up. There were 12 patients, with 3 of them in serious condition. Flora had already helped stabilize a 62-year-old man having a heart attack and cared for a teen with a bad burn. She had also calmed down a panicked young mother. She demonstrated to the woman that her child had not swallowed a battery, but just a tiny piece of a pencil eraser. She was at the main desk updating medical records when Dr. Paul Hennessy came over. He carried a coffee cup and was trying to act very relaxed. "It seems like a quiet night so far," he said. Flora continued to type. "Can I bring you some coffee? I made far too much. I am fine." "You always say that." "That is because I am always fine." Paul was 44 years old and had been trying to get Flora's attention for the last 8 months. He just did not have the confidence to ask her out on a date. He was a kind man, and Flora wished he would find someone else to pursue. "Do you have anything planned for the weekend?" he attempted. "Working." "You are always working on weekends." The hospital has to be staffed. He gave a little laugh. You know, for someone so quiet, you really know how to shut down a conversation. Flora finally raised her head to look at him. Her eyes were not mean, just very direct. Paul, please go and drink your coffee. He gave a nod, accepting his defeat, and then walked away. Flora returned to updating her charts. At 12:37, the first tremor shook the entire building. She felt it in the soles of her shoes a moment before she heard anything. It was a deep, powerful vibration. It could have been a very big truck driving by on the road, but Flora knew that feeling. She had experienced it before, on many occasions, in places that were nothing like a quiet hospital in Oregon. Her hand stopped moving above the keyboard. She lifted her head. On the other side of the emergency room, a few other nurses had confused looks on their faces. They glanced up at the overhead lights, and then at one another. A patient in bed 3 wanted to know what that noise was. Another person made a nervous joke about late-night construction. Flora slid her chair back and got to her feet. The vibration was getting much stronger. It was not a truck, and it was not construction. It was the sound of several heavy helicopter blades approaching very quickly. She moved toward the window by the ambulance entrance. She placed her hand on the cool surface of the glass for 3 seconds, feeling the rhythmic pulsing. Then she moved away from it. "Deborah," she called out, her voice perfectly calm. Deborah was already looking at her from the other side of the room. The look on Flora's face was all it took for the head nurse to walk over right away. "What is that sound?" Deborah asked in a low voice. "You have to move the patients with minor issues to the other wing of the hospital," Flora told her. "Do it immediately, and do it in a way that does not create panic." Deborah just stared at her. Why? Flora simply met her gaze. Something in that stare made Deborah decide it was better not to ask again. "Ortega, Patterson, I need treatment bays 1 through 4 cleared out now," Deborah ordered. Her tone was as demanding as usual. She did not reveal that she had no clue why she was giving the command. The sound had now become a loud, deep thrum that made the IV bags tremble on their stands. "Is that a helicopter?" A young nurse by the name of Cassie asked. She was only 26 years old. The first aircraft appeared, its bright searchlight sweeping across the dark parking area. A second one followed closely behind it, and then a third. Someone standing nearby whispered, "Oh my goodness." By the time the 4th and 5th helicopters flew into view, patients were climbing out of their beds to get to the windows. A woman in Bay 7 began to cry. The young mother grabbed her small child and moved away from the glass. Deborah looked directly at Flora. "Montgomery, I need you to tell me what is going on." Flora was observing the helicopters land with a strange expression. It was not an expression of fear, and it was not an expression of surprise. It was something much deeper and more complex. "8, she said quietly, almost to herself. "What did you say?" "There are 8 of them." She was now able to tell the difference between each engine's sound, all of them roaring at once. "That is a complete tactical extraction team." Deborah grabbed her by the arm. "Flora, what do you know about all of this?" Flora looked down at Deborah's hand, then back up to her eyes. For a brief second, the woman who tried so hard to be invisible let her mask fall away. Something ancient and wise looked out from her eyes, something that knew exactly what 8 black helicopters signified. "Nothing," Flora said in a soft voice. "Just keep everyone calm and contact hospital security." But security was already on its way, and they were hopelessly outmatched. The soldiers were already entering the hospital. They came into the building with quick and practiced movements. 8 of them came in through the front entrance. 4 more entered through the ambulance bay. All of them were wearing full combat gear. They moved with such perfect coordination that the large room suddenly felt very small and confining. They did not point their weapons or shout at anyone. They were completely professional. Their quiet presence was much more unsettling than yelling would have been. One of the soldiers lifted a hand and said in a clear voice, "All non-essential staff, please move to the end of the hallway. You are not in any harm. We simply need your cooperation." But everyone was too shocked to move. Then another voice cut through the silence from behind the soldiers. This voice did not make a request. "Clear this room." It was not a yell. It was the kind of voice that did not need to be loud. It was a voice that people obeyed without thinking. At 12:41 in the morning, Colonel John Vance walked into the emergency room of St. Jude Medical Center. He had the tough appearance of a man who had spent 30 years making choices that most people could not even imagine. He was in his late 50s, his face was lined by battles worse than any storm, and his eyes scanned the room like a security camera, taking in every detail. He came to a stop in the middle of the chaotic scene. Deborah, being who she was, walked up to challenge him. "This is a medical facility. You cannot simply enter like this. I do not care who you are. I will need to see some type of—" "Where is Angel 6? Vance interrupted. A heavy silence filled the entire room. "I beg your pardon," Deborah said, confused. "Angel 6. His eyes were already scanning the room, looking at every person, every uniform, every set of scrubs, and every corner that he could see. "I am looking for Angel 6, and I need to find her right now." "I have no idea what you are talking about," Deborah said. "There is no one here by that." Her voice faded because she had turned to check the nurse's station and saw that Flora was no longer there. No public hospital map showed the supply corridor behind the station. It was a narrow, dim hallway that stretched for about 40 feet, running alongside the main emergency room before it forked. One way led to the pharmacy, the other went to a service staircase. Flora knew its path by heart after just 3 days on the job. In her first 2 weeks, she had memorized the layout of the entire hospital. She never thought about why she did it. It was simply an old instinct. She moved through the dark hall without a light, using her left hand to trace the wall and guide her way. Her steps made no sound on the floor. She did not run, because running signals panic, and she could not afford that kind of weakness. She replayed the facts in her mind: 8 helicopters, soldiers in full tactical gear, and a colonel making a personal appearance. Then they said the name, her former name. A name she had buried so deep she sometimes forgot it existed. Someone had spoken it out loud in this new life, right in her emergency room. It had been 3 quiet years. 3 years of deliberate invisibility. 3 years of wearing faded scrubs, speaking softly, and parking in the furthest spot from the entrance. It took 3 years to become Flora Montgomery, the forgettable, unseen nurse who worked the night shift. She braced herself against the wall, closing her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. They had located her. She had no idea how. She had been incredibly cautious. She legally changed her name long before the mission that was supposed to be her very last. She had moved 3 different times. She created a life so perfectly ordinary that it was a form of camouflage. But somehow, Vance had still found her. She opened her eyes. The one guarantee with John Vance was his ability to find anyone he was looking for. She understood this about him. She had understood it for a very long time. She knew it back when she still trusted him, back when she was a different person, back when trust came so easily to her. She began walking again, moving toward the service stairs. From the emergency room behind her, she could hear the organized chaos of soldiers mingling with hospital staff and worried patients. Above it all, she recognized Vance's voice, asking questions with the easy confidence of a man who already had the answers. She got to the stairwell door and pushed it open. Private First Class Danny Oss was waiting on the other side. He was a young man, maybe 24 years old, with a stillness that came from intense training, not from actual combat. He was not aiming his weapon at her. He kept it held across his chest and gave her a look that seemed almost apologetic. "Ma'am," he said. Flora took a second to assess him. She observed his stance, his positioning, the way his eyes tracked her hands, and the subtle tension in his jaw that revealed his desire for a simple outcome. "How many exits has he covered?" she asked. Danny blinked, answering before he could think to stop. "All of them, ma'am." Flora breathed out a quiet sigh. Of course he did. She turned around and headed back toward the emergency room. After just 12 steps, she heard Vance's voice again, much nearer this time. She realized he had already deduced where she went. She had about 30 seconds left. She spent 20 of them standing completely still, just breathing, allowing the part of her that was Flora Montgomery to accept the new reality. Then she stepped through the doorway and back into the brightly lit room. Vance spotted her immediately. His expression did not change, but his eyes locked onto her with a new certainty, like a compass needle snapping to true north. "There she is," he announced. The whole room turned to look. Every soldier, every nurse, and every patient who could sit up was staring. Paul Hennessy was standing by the medicine cart with his coffee cup still in hand, his jaw slack with surprise. Deborah Sims stood with her arms folded, her gaze shifting between Flora and the colonel, her expression showing she was rapidly reevaluating everything she thought she knew. Cassie, a newer nurse, whispered to a coworker, "Who is that?" Vance approached Flora, and she stood her ground. He stopped 4 feet from her. Seeing him up close, he seemed older than she recalled, but his eyes had not changed. They were still dark and direct, and they held the weight of 1,000 hard choices. "You look different," he commented. "I am different," she replied. "No." He gave a single shake of his head. "You look different, but you are not." She met his stare. "What do you want, Colonel?" "You already know the answer. Tell me anyway." He studied her for a moment before he answered. "Barnes is dying." The name struck her like a physical blow, but she gave no reaction. She remained perfectly still and kept her voice steady. "What happened?" "A mission went wrong." His jaw clenched. 18 hours ago. "We managed to get him out, but he is." He did not finish the sentence. That small hesitation, from a man who never hesitated, told her everything a medical chart could. "The surgeons at the base cannot stabilize him. He is on the helicopter right now. We have about 40 minutes. 40 minutes to do what? For you to come and do what you do best." The room became completely silent. No one moved. No one made a noise. All eyes in the room were fixed on Flora. She stared at Vance for a long, quiet moment. Then, she spoke so softly, only he could hear her. "You had no right to come here." "I am aware of that," he replied. And that was all. He offered no excuse or defense. "You have no right to use that name." "I know. And Barnes." Her voice broke for just a fraction of a second, a sound so small that only someone listening intently would have noticed. "Barnes did not deserve to be put in the middle of your mission." Vance gave no reply. Flora glanced down at her hands, which she had placed palms down in front of her. It was a habit she fell into when the past felt too close. Her hands were steady. They had always been steady, regardless of the chaos happening around her or inside her own mind. That was the one part of herself she never lost. She looked back up at him. "Bring him in," she commanded. Vance gave a curt nod and lifted his radio. From behind, Deborah moved to Flora's side, her voice low and tight. "Flora, what is happening? Who are you?" Flora simply reached down and rolled up her sleeve. An angel's wing was tattooed from her wrist to her elbow. Its lines were sharp and dark, the feathers drawn with intricate and meaningful detail. She had gotten it 2 months after the accident, in the first city she ran to. It was both a memorial and a warning. It was a memorial for the woman she was trying to forget, and a warning about why she had to leave that life behind. Deborah just stared at the ink. "What does it mean?" "It means," Flora said, already moving toward a trauma bay, "that for tonight, you are just going to have to trust me." She did not glance back. She was pulling on a pair of gloves when the doors flew open and they brought Barnes in on a gurney. She had tried to prepare herself to see him like this, but it was no use. The moment the stretcher came in, she saw Michael Barnes, the same man who had once carried her from a burning building without a second thought. Now he was lying there, covered in tubes and field bandages, his skin a ghostly white that signaled he was losing his fight for life. Something inside of her clicked into place, a sensation so real she could almost taste it. The Flora, who parked far away, spoke quietly, and kept her arms covered, was still there. She had just stepped to the side. "Give me the report," she said to the medic pushing the gurney. Her voice sounded completely different now. It now held a new authority that commanded the attention of every person in the room, even if they did not understand why. "Gunshot, blast injury, or a combination?" "Both," the medic replied, his own tone immediately shifting to match hers. "Shrapnel to the left side of the chest, a single gunshot to the right abdomen. His lung collapsed. We treated it, but it is collapsing again. His blood pressure is falling. His heart rate is... I can see his heart rate. She was already at his side. Her hands were moving, instinctively doing what they were trained for. The world around her shrunk, just as it always did at times like these. It now contained only the patient in front of her. And the next thing that had to be done, who is my trauma surgeon? That would be me. Dr. Hennessy appeared on the other side of the gurney. His voice sounded professional, but you could hear the shock underneath. He was a man looking at a woman he thought he knew, and realizing he never knew her at all. Paul Hennessy. Paul. She looked up, and her eyes met his over Barnes's still body. You will follow my instructions to the letter. You will work quickly, and you will not ask any questions. Can you do that? She held his gaze for 2 full seconds. Yes, he said. She gave a single, sharp nod and said, let's begin. The doors to the trauma room swung closed behind them. In the hallway outside, Colonel Vance stood like a stone statue, his gaze fixed on those doors. Deborah walked over to stand next to him. In her 28 years as a nurse, she had witnessed things that would stay with her for life. She had seen people at their absolute worst and their absolute best, and all the messy parts in between. Her eyes moved to the trauma room doors. She is going to save him, isn't she? Deborah said. It sounded more like a fact than a question. Vance was silent for a moment. Then he replied, she never fails. Inside, Flora Montgomery placed her hands on the chest of the man who had been her sergeant. She felt the uneven rhythm of his breathing and called out, I need an 18-gauge needle, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, right now. Her hands were perfectly steady. They always were. The trauma room was not a big space, but it felt incredibly small in that moment. Flora worked in a silence that was so profound it felt heavy. It drew everyone else in, making them match her rhythm and even her breathing. Paul Hennessy had been a trauma surgeon for 11 years. He had worked alongside imposing doctors, gifted residents, and the kind of nurses who were the hospital's backbone. But he had never seen anyone work on a patient the way she did. Her commands were given only once. She made split-second decisions. Each action flowed into the next, as if her hands knew the path all along. Her title said she was a nurse, but her skill told a completely different story. I need a chest tube, she stated with quiet command. Ortega, the other nurse, had it ready before the words left her mouth. What's his pressure? Flora asked, her gaze fixed on the man on the table. 74/40, Paul answered. It's going to dip again before it levels out, so I need everyone to remain calm. She spoke while her hands moved in a steady, graceful dance, ignoring the frantic alarms and the thick tension in the air. She even managed to ignore Colonel John Vance, the man from her past, who stood only a few feet away. Michael, she whispered, a promise meant only for Barnes. You need to stay here with me. Are you hearing me? You do not give up on me. But Barnes was completely still. His breaths were shallow and weak, his body focused on that one desperate task. He can't hear you, Ortega said gently. Yes, he can, Flora replied, her voice filled with unshakable certainty. They always can. Paul watched her incredible work, totally silent. The clock read 12:51 in the morning. A strange quiet had fallen over the entire emergency room. Without being told, the soldiers had spread out, covering every exit. They knew the real fight was in this room, and they were powerless to help. By the nurse's station, Deborah Sims stood with her arms folded tightly across her chest. She gritted her teeth, battling the overwhelming need to march into that room. She had a desperate urge to confront the woman she thought she had known for 3 years, who now felt like a total stranger. Cassie approached her side. What is going on in there? She asked in a low voice. Medicine, Deborah replied with a sharp edge. But she is just a nurse. Deborah shot her a look that silenced her. Be quiet, Cassie. A young sergeant with short hair came toward them. Ma'am, Sergeant Reyes, can I help manage things out here while your people are busy? Deborah stared at her for a second. On any other night, she would have dismissed a soldier trying to run her floor. But this was not any other night. Yes, bed 6 needs a blood pressure check. The man in Bay 8 is trying to get out of bed again. and I need someone to locate the portable ultrasound I asked for 3 hours ago. Reyes nodded once and turned away immediately. As she walked off, Deborah thought about how little rules and training sometimes mattered. Near the window, Dr. Paul Hennessy's resident, Marcus Webb, was frozen in place. The 29-year-old had followed Paul's every move for 6 months, but now he could only stare into the trauma bay. He had been perfectly still for 4 minutes. Deborah knew that look. It was the face of a person whose entire world had just been turned upside down, leaving them with one enormous question. She understood that feeling all too well. At 1:03 in the morning, Barnes's heart monitor screamed a frantic alarm. Paul shouted the obvious, but Flora was already reacting. "He is in VFib," she said. "Paddles." Ortega started to protest. "We are not supposed to." "Paddles," Flora repeated, her voice leaving no space for debate. Ortega immediately fell silent and grabbed them. Paul found his own hands on the crash cart. "Charging to 200. 150, Flora corrected him. "His chest is compromised." 150. "And be careful with the placement." He glanced up at her over the cart. Her eyes were steady and confident. She was asking for his trust. He adjusted the charge to 150. "Clear." The shock made Barnes's body arch off the table. The monitor showed a flat line, then a slow, faint beat returned. Paul let out a breath he had been holding. Flora did not. "Keep your focus on him," she commanded. "His pressure is falling again. We need to pack the wound in his abdomen before his heart gives out." Paul chose his next words with care. "Flora, what you did, the charge amount, the placement, that is not standard protocol." "I know," she replied. "It is a field technique. I modified it for his wounds." She pulled on a new set of gloves. "And it is effective. How could you possibly understand his injuries so well that—" "Because this is not the first time I have treated him," she cut in. Her words hung in the air, revealing a long, hidden story Paul was just beginning to see. "Paul, I will explain what I can, but not until Michael Barnes is no longer in danger. For now, I just need a surgeon. Can you do that for me?" "Yes," he replied, without any hesitation. The time was 1:14 in the morning. Most people read Colonel Vance all wrong. They saw the strong jaw, heard the commanding voice, and felt the way he dominated a space. They decided he must be an impatient man. They figured he was the type who demanded fast results and bulldozed obstacles simply because he hated to wait. They were mistaken. Vance was more patient than almost anyone. He could exist in silence and uncertainty that would shatter other people for as long as it took. It was a skill learned over a long career, because he knew that impatience was the mother of failure. But standing here in this hospital hallway, hearing the muffled chaos from the trauma room, that famous patience was wearing thin. It had been 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days since he had last seen Flora Montgomery. He did not have to remember the number. It was simply burned into his mind. It was like casualty figures, operation codes, or the coordinates of a mission gone wrong. He had been waiting for 31 minutes. Sergeant Reyes came to his side. "Sir, we have a problem with the hospital administrator, a man named Garrett. He has been on the phone for 20 minutes, and it does not sound personal." "What kind of problem?" Vance asked. "The legal kind, sir," she replied. Vance's face remained a mask. "Please tell Mr. Garrett, this hospital is operating under Federal Emergency Code 7 Bravo. I will be happy to speak with him once Sergeant Barnes is stable." Reyes paused. "Sir, is that a real code?" Vance's voice was like steel. "It is now." She nodded and walked off, leaving Vance to stare at the trauma room doors. He was the one who authorized the mission that landed Barnes in that bed. He had reviewed the intelligence, calculated the risks, and gave the final order. In over 30 years, he had made thousands of those decisions. Most had good outcomes. A few were catastrophic. It was a heavy part of the job, a burden he had accepted long ago. He tried to tell himself that again now, but in this sterile hallway, the old justifications felt weak. It was 1:22 in the morning. "She recognized your name," Deborah said. Vance turned to find the head nurse next to him, having arrived as quietly as a shadow. Her silent approach was a skill she had perfected. making her stealthier than many of his own soldiers. "I beg your pardon," he said. "Flora. When you arrived, she did not look surprised that you knew her, but her expression when you said Barnes's name, that was something else entirely." Deborah studied him with a gaze that seemed to see right through him. "What sort of danger did you put him in?" "That is classified information. He is my patient, fighting for his life, which is precisely why we are both here." Deborah thought about his answer. "How long were you looking for her?" Vance almost did not reply. For some time, he finally admitted. "She did not want to be found." "No," Deborah agreed, "but you found her anyway." It was not an accusation, but a simple fact as she put the pieces together. "And you came for her tonight. Not just any doctor, but her specifically." Vance remained silent. "She is the finest you have ever worked with," Deborah stated. It was a fact, not a question. After a very long pause, Vance answered softly, "Yes." Deborah glanced at the trauma room doors. "She has been an employee here for almost 3 years," she said. "On every shift, she works as if she has something to prove. She never calls out sick, never complains, never asks for anything." She sighed deeply. "I used to think she was just unbelievably disciplined." "She is certainly that," Vance said. "No," Deborah corrected him, shaking her head slowly. "Discipline is different. What she is a person who has carried a terrible weight for a very long time. And she works until she is exhausted, so she never has to set it down and truly look at it." She gave him a knowing look. "Do you happen to know what that weight is?" Vance's jaw tightened just slightly. "Yes," he said. "I do. It was 1:31 in the morning. Back in the trauma room, Flora was on her 3rd pair of gloves, and Michael Barnes's blood pressure was up by 4 points. It was a small win, but it was a win. She knew his body almost as well as her own. She had performed surgery on Barnes on 2 other occasions, in places that made this sterile trauma bay seem like a luxury hotel. She knew his blood type by heart, every one of his allergies, how his system responded to shock, and the story behind a scar on his left arm from a mission in Kandahar they were forbidden to speak of. She knew he was a survivor, more stubborn than anyone she knew, sometimes more stubborn than his own biology. "Please, Michael," she urged in a low voice. "I know you can hear me. You are the most incredibly stubborn man I have ever had the misfortune to know. You do not get to leave like this. This is not how your story ends." Paul heard her talking and looked up from his work. "You are speaking to him again." "I never stopped." "Do you believe his blood pressure is actually rising?" Ortega asked. Paul peeked at the monitor. It read 79/48. It was dangerously low, but it was going up. He looked back toward Flora. "I told you it would," she said. The time was 1:39 in the morning. The next disturbance came from a totally unexpected place. The main doors of the emergency room slid open, and a man in regular clothes entered. He was in his mid-50s and large, with the flushed red face of someone who had just lost a screaming argument. He was flanked by 2 men in suits, and their federal badges gleamed on their belts. The man in the center was Gerald Harmon, a deputy director from a government agency with intentionally vague authority. He had been on a plane for 3 hours and was exhausted. His mood was terrible, and he always took it out on the nearest person. That person happened to be Colonel John Vance. The 2 men made eye contact. "John," Harmon said. "Gerald," Vance responded. A heavy silence settled over the emergency room. It was the kind of quiet that falls when everyone knows they are about to see an old conflict reignite. "You had no authority to recover Barnes this way," Harmon stated. His voice was firm, but barely. "You were expressly forbidden from locating or making contact with the asset. Barnes was on the verge of death. Barnes was a casualty of an approved mission, meant to be processed through official channels. He was dying in a field in a country I cannot mention here," Vance said, his voice becoming dangerously quiet and cold. "And you have the nerve to lecture me about authorization?" "She was not supposed to be contacted," Harmon retorted. "That was our deal. Her departure from the program was final. Her new life was under protection. You did not have the authority. She is the only person alive who can save his life. There are procedures for these things. The procedures were failing him. Vance said, I made a choice. You made a choice. Harmon's voice dropped to a whisper. John, do you have any idea what the consequences will be? She is exposed now. This whole hospital, all of these people, they have seen her. They heard the code name. It is going to get out. The information always gets out. Then we will manage it, Vance replied, after she saves Barnes. And what about her wishes? Deborah's voice sliced through the tension. Both of the men turned. Deborah Sims was standing 5 feet from them, with her arms crossed and her patience completely exhausted. You, she said, locking her eyes onto Harmon. I have no idea who you are, but you are in my hospital, talking about my nurse as if she were a piece of paper. I need you to stop that immediately. Then she turned her glare on Vance. And you came here because you had a need for her, not because you considered what this would do to her. You are fully aware that is the truth. She glared at them both. For 3 years, that woman has built a careful and quiet life. She created something real for herself here. And tonight, the two of you came in and shattered it, and now you stand here debating rules. She shook her head in disgust. You should both be ashamed. Harmon just stared blankly at her. Ma'am, this is a matter of national. I do not care, Deborah said flatly. A thick silence filled the room. Then, one of Harmon's men leaned in and whispered something to him. Harmon's expression changed in a way that was difficult to decipher. What is it? Vance asked. Harmon looked directly at him. His face was different. The official anger was still present, but now there was something else beneath it. If you looked carefully, it almost resembled fear. There has been another incident, Harmon said. Vance stood perfectly still. What kind of incident? The same cell that attacked Barnes's team. They have found the extraction location. He took a breath. They are aware that she is here. It was 1:47 in the morning. Vance had his radio to his lips before Harmon even finished his sentence. Reyes, establish a secure perimeter right now. I want all exits under active surveillance. No one gets through these doors without my direct command. He faced Harmon. How long do we have? Our intelligence suggests 30 minutes, perhaps less. Who is on their way? Deborah asked. Her tone had not changed at all. It was still calm and authoritative. But for just a moment, her eyes darted toward the doors of the trauma room. The individuals who do not want Barnes to testify about what he witnessed, Harmon said. And then, because Deborah was staring at him with a power that required a better answer, he added more. They are also the same individuals who do not want Angel 6 to be active ever again. Deborah looked back at Vance. She is not aware of this. No, she is in that room saving his life, completely ignorant that the people who hurt him are now on their way to get her. Vance's jaw was clenched. We will inform her once Barnes is stable. And what if she must know sooner? He had no answer because he already knew the reality. Flora needed every available second to keep Barnes alive. If he went in there and informed her of the danger, it would shatter the focus in the room. A tiny fraction of her concentration would be diverted, and that small change could mean the difference between life and death. He had already made that risk assessment in the 30 seconds after Harmon spoke. He understood it was a heartless decision. He also understood it was the kind of decision Flora would never be able to forgive him for. He was accustomed to not being forgiven. She will be informed when Barnes is stable, he repeated. Deborah studied him for a long, intense moment. Then she strode to the nurse's station and grabbed the phone. This is Charge Nurse Sims. I am ordering a lockdown of the east and south wings. I also want security on every single first floor exit, and I need it to happen in the next 2 minutes. She paused to listen. Because I said so, Kevin, get moving. She slammed the phone down and turned to Vance. I am not like you. I will not make cold calculations about what she has a right to know, but I will allow you 5 more minutes before I go in there myself. Vance said, I appreciate that. Do not thank me, Deborah shot back. I did not do that for you. It was 1:55 in the morning. Flora sensed the shift in Barnes before the equipment did. It was a subtle change in his stillness, a very small shift in how his body resisted her hands. She had learned to detect it years before in places that had no working machines, where you only had your hands and your intuition. He is beginning to fight back, she said. Paul looked up from the stitches he was applying. His pressure is still. He is fighting, she said again, her voice quiet but firm. Ortega called out, 86, over 52. Paul blinked, his eyes opening wide. He stared at the monitor. That is... Wow. Yes, that is actually going up. Keep working, Flora said. We are not finished, but he is helping us now. She allowed herself to feel it for just 1 second. It was a brief, quiet wave of relief. It was the strange comfort of knowing that the same stubborn nature in Michael Barnes she always complained about was the exact thing that was keeping him alive tonight. That somewhere deep down, beneath all the injuries and the blood loss, that relentless, maddening, amazing will to live was still present. You were always my most challenging patient, she whispered to him, and at this moment, I have never been more thankful for that in my entire life. Paul looked at her, over the top of his surgical mask. His eyes held an expression she did not have time to analyze. Flora, we are not out of the woods yet. She replied, I know, He interrupted her. Never mind, let us finish this. She gave a nod, and they went back to their work. At 2:04 in the morning, Barnes's pressure was steady at 91/60 when a voice came through Vance's radio. Colonel! It was Reyes, and his voice was tense. We have activity on the south side. Vehicle lights, no license plates visible, about 400 meters away, and not heading for the highway. Vance shot a look at Harmon, who remained silent. How many are there? Vance spoke into the radio. At least 2 vehicles. There might be more hidden in the trees. We are trying to get a visual. Maintain your position. Do not engage. I repeat, you will not engage until I give the order. He put the radio down. Deborah was right next to him, no longer pretending she was not listening. Your 5 minutes are over, she said to him. He looked at the doors of the trauma room. I am aware, he said, and then he began to walk toward them. It was 2:07 in the morning. Flora heard the door open, but did not lift her head. We are in the middle of something, she said. Unless the hospital is burning down, you need to go. It is not burning, Vance said. But we have a much worse problem. She still did not look at him. The man on the table with 3 terrible injuries was an easier thing to confront than this. He said her name. Flora. Not Angel 6, not a number. The name she had picked for herself. The name she had used to create an entirely new life. That made her listen. Her hands paused for just a heartbeat. She gave Ortega a brief glance that conveyed everything. And then she turned. Vance was standing in the entrance. He seemed older in this light, or perhaps she was just seeing him in a new way. He wore an expression she had only witnessed a few times in her life. It was not exactly regret. John Vance was not a man who felt regret, but this was something very close to it. It was the look of a person who was about to ask for the single thing he had no right to ask for, and he was fully aware of it. They know you are here, he said, his voice quiet. The room fell completely silent. Ortega froze, her hand still on Barnes. Paul just stared at the monitor, refusing to turn away. Every person heard him. Flora held Vance's gaze for a long time. How much time have I got? She asked. 20 minutes. Maybe not even that. She glanced at Barnes. Then, at the monitor's rising numbers, she saw her gloved hands stained by the last 90 minutes. Looking back at Vance, her face hardened with a new resolve, erasing the conflict he had brought with him. The path forward was suddenly clear, not because the situation was simple, but because her choice was fine, she said. Vance's slight flinch did not escape her notice. Fine, Wayne. I get it, she said again. The answer is yes. Her attention snapped back to the patient. But I'm finishing this first. The person you brought here, the one you broke our word for, is lying on this table, and he is still critical. She seamlessly took Ortega's place with practiced efficiency. 20 minutes is plenty. Now get out of my trauma bay and let me do my job. For a brief moment, Vance hesitated at the door. Then, very quietly, he said, Yes, ma'am, and withdrew. The door shut. From the other side of the gurney, Paul Hennessy kept his eyes on Flora. She refused to look at him. Her focus was entirely on her patient, her jaw set like stone. Her shoulders were tense, showing incredible self-control. This was the same woman who disappeared for 3 years. The woman who rebuilt her life from nothing, now fighting for a life in the one room where she was in charge. No matter what was going on or what was waiting for her beyond that door, this was a skill she never lost. Her hands were completely steady. They were always steady. For a full 4 minutes, Barnes's blood pressure held at 93/61. Flora finally let herself believe it. She did not cheer or breathe a sigh of relief. She just trusted it, like you trust a bridge to hold you as you step onto it. You are never sure until it is over. But you have to go on. He needs a vascular surgeon and a clean operating room, she said, not looking up. Who do we have at this hospital? Dr. Renata Vasquez is on call, Paul replied. She is amazing, one of the absolute best. Bring her in. It is 2 o'clock in the morning. Paul, bring her in. He pulled out his phone. Flora looked at Barnes's face. The gray color of his skin was fading. It was a small change, but it showed his body was starting to fight back. He was in his mid-30s, but tonight he looked much older. He always did seem older than he was. She once teased him about it, in a different life where she still laughed. Hey, Ortega said quietly next to her. Are you doing okay? Flora looked at her. Ortega was 31, skilled with her hands and had an even keener sense of things. Flora had always enjoyed working with her. I am fine, Flora replied. Ortega studied her for a moment, understanding that her words might not tell the full truth. Then she returned to monitoring the patient. Flora peeled off her top pair of gloves and pulled on a new set. She had 11 minutes, possibly fewer. She planned to use every single second. At 2:13 in the morning, the feeling in the emergency room changed. The soldiers were not relaxed anymore. They moved with a sudden, focused purpose, checking angles, murmuring to each other, and watching their colonel with an intensity that spelled danger to the hospital staff. A serious threat was on its way. Cassie, a young nurse who wore her emotions on her sleeve, approached Sergeant Reyes by the window. Are we going to be all right? She asked. Reyes met her gaze. Only if you keep away from the windows and follow my commands precisely, if it comes to that. You did not say no. No, Reyes admitted. I did not. Cassie's face lost its color, but she said nothing more. Across the room, Marcus Webb, Paul's resident, stood by the nurse's station. He acted like he was working on charts, but he just stared at a dark screen. He was caught between the miracle he had witnessed and the danger waiting outside in the darkness. Gerald Harmon had been on the phone for 6 minutes. His voice was quiet and measured, giving nothing away, but his red face told another story. Deborah was no longer just managing. She was taking action. She began to move every mobile patient away from the windows and outer walls of the building. She turned off unnecessary lights in the east hallway. She sent 3 nurses upstairs to admitted patients and told them to remain there. She gave these orders in a firm tone that left no room for argument. She was 61 and had nursed through 3 hurricanes, a mass casualty incident, and a chemical spill that evacuated a whole floor. She did not panic. Panic was a luxury for people with extra time, which she never had. She walked over to Vance, who was looking out a window facing south. What sort of trouble is coming our way? She asked. His gaze remained fixed outside, the kind that is very good at their job. Are your people better? A long pause followed. On a good day, they are. And is this a good day? The silence stretched even longer. It is a complicated day. Deborah replied, I need a straight answer right now, or my patients are going to suffer. Vance at last turned to look at her. I will do everything in my power to make sure that does not happen. That is not a promise. No, he conceded. It is not. For 3 long seconds, Deborah stared right at him. Then she gave a single, sharp nod, accepting the grim reality, and went back to work. At 2:19 in the morning, Vance's radio came to life. Colonel, we have got a visual on 2 vehicles, black sport utility vehicles, stopped 250 meters south of us. They are not moving closer, but we count at least 4 people inside, maybe more. Copy that. Hold your positions. If they approach this building, you tell me first. Do not engage. Yes, sir. A short silence. Sir, Richter says, one of them has a scope trained on us. Vance's jaw tightened. I understand. He put the radio down and faced Harmon. The man had finished his call and was standing close by. The anger on his face had been replaced by a quiet, guarded look. Gerald, Vance started, his voice soft, so only Harmon could hear. Can you think of any reason why they found us this fast? John, that is a very serious accusation, but it is not a denial. No, Harmon acknowledged. It is not. He finally turned to look at him. I found out about this location from official intelligence just 40 minutes ago. I told you that. How official? Silence. Gerald. There might have been a data breach, Harmon confessed, almost whispering. Inside the agency. We do not know how bad it is. You thought there was a breach and you still came here? I came to assess the situation. You led them straight to us. Vance's voice did not get louder. It changed. It became flat, cold, and dangerously calm. You were aware of a security leak. You got on a plane with your government identification showing, and you flew right to a sensitive location. Harmon started to protest. I did not know the breach included. How long have you known about this leak? Silence. Gerald, how long? 6 days, Harmon admitted. The words landed between them with a thud. 6 days. The same 6 days since Barnes's mission was compromised. The 6 days that Barnes was hurt and flown halfway around the world to a secret facility. Vance suddenly understood everything. He lifted his radio. His voice was completely calm. Reyes, assume this location is compromised. Prepare the patient for evac. I need an exit strategy. Sir, the patient is in no shape to be moved. I know that. Make a plan anyway. He lowered the radio and stared at Harmon. If that woman gets hurt because of a leak you covered up for 6 days, you and I will not be able to be in the same room for the next 10 years. Is that clear? Harmon was silent. Vance turned away from him and walked toward the trauma bay. It was 2:24 in the morning. This time, Flora sensed his approach. It was not his footsteps, but a slight change in the air just before the door opened. The atmosphere always shifted right before Vance walked in. She had learned that feeling over 2 years, and she never forgot it. She did not look around. Barnes is doing better than he was 20 minutes ago, she stated. He needs surgery. I have got him stable enough for a specialist to take over. Vance cut her off. He is not going anywhere tonight, Flora. And before you argue, moving him would erase all the progress I have made for the past 90 minutes, and I will not allow that to happen. Not for your schedule, not for your risk assessment, and not for any reason short of a direct threat to everyone here. Vance then said the leak was from the agency. Harmon knew about it for 6 days. Flora froze completely. Ortega glanced up. Paul turned his head. The monitors continued their steady beeping, unaware of the weight of his words. 6 days, Flora repeated quietly. That's right. She carefully set down her tool and faced him. She sized Vance up the same way she assessed any threat. Quickly, efficiently, and with no emotion. Her mind was already connecting the dots. 6 days ago, Barnes's entire operation had been compromised. Barnes was hit. He was brought here. And somewhere in those 6 days, one of the few people who knew about the mission, about her, and about this clinic, had turned. Who knew I was here? She asked sharply. The list is short. Vance replied, me, 2 of my senior people, and Harmon. Harmon, she said, letting the name hang in the air. Yes, and he came to this very location. He did. Using his official credentials, clear as day. The look on Vance's face confirmed it was true. For a single beat, Flora's eyes flicked toward the ceiling. Then they locked back onto his. You need to move every non-medical person in this hospital to the upper floors. Immediately. Not in 10 minutes. Now. Reyes is already on it, Colonel, she said, peeling off her gloves. I need an exact list of your equipment and personnel stationed outside, because when they figure out I am here, they are not going to wait in their cars. And when they make their move, I need to see this hospital from their perspective. Vance just looked at her for a moment. His face was a mix of emotions he could not quite place. He finally answered We have 2 six-man tactical teams with standard issue gear. We also have 1 sniper on the roof to the east. Your sniper has no line of sight if they come from the west, she stated. I know. O'Kane is watching the west entrance. I know we can count on O'Kane, she said. The casual way she said the young soldier's name revealed more about Flora Montgomery to Paul and Ortega than the last 3 years they had been colleagues. What about the parking garage? I have 2 soldiers posted on the 2nd level. Move one of them to the service corridor entrance on the 1st floor, she instructed. It is the most direct path from the garage to us. Vance paused for a second. You have studied the building plans. I always study the plans, she replied plainly. She then glanced at Barnes, her fingers brushing against his bed rail. The touch was quick, more personal than clinical. She looked at Paul. He needs to be watched around the clock. Page me if his pressure moves at all. I do not care where I am. I already put in a call to Vasquez. She is on her way, Paul said, his voice steady. Inside, he was re-evaluating everything he thought he knew about this woman. She will be here in 15 minutes. Good. When she arrives, get her into an operating room to prep. You will bring her up to speed on everything. Flora started for the door. Flora, Paul called out, stopping her. She looked back. He held her gaze with a surprising intensity, reminding her he was more than the guy with a friendly smile and a coffee cup. What are you going to do? He asked. She met his stare for a long moment. I am going to do what needs to be done. With that, she pushed through the door. It was 2:31 in the morning. The atmosphere in the emergency room had shifted over the last hour. The initial shock of armed soldiers and helicopters had faded, leaving a quiet, simmering dread. It was the unique tension that comes when people know a disaster is on its way and there is nothing they can do to stop it. Deborah was standing at the nurse's station. She saw Flora approach but said nothing, which was very unusual for her. That silence told Flora that Deborah already knew what Vance had said. The upper floors? Flora stated. I handled that 15 minutes ago. Deborah met her eyes. I announced it was a surprise fire drill. Flora almost smiled. Smart. How is Barnes? He is hanging on, but by a thread. She scanned the room. Reyes and 2 soldiers were positioned near the ambulance bay doors. Harmon stood near the wall, staring at his phone like a man who had run out of time. Cassie and 2 younger nurses were huddled by the medication station, trying their best to look like they were not terrified. Flora walked over to them. Cassie looked up, her face a storm of questions she knew better than to ask. Listen to me very carefully, Flora said. She used her emergency room voice, a tone that cut right through fear, and commanded them to listen. You 3 will take the medicine cart. Grab every vital supply from the cold storage unit, too. Take it all to the supply closet on the 2nd floor. Lock the door behind you and do not open it for anyone. Only Deborah or I will come get you ourselves. Not a soldier, not another doctor, just us. Cassie asked, what do we do about the patients who are still down here? Bay 1 and Bay 2 are clear. The patient in Bay 3 can be moved. I will take care of Bay 5 myself. She made eye contact with each of them. Do you understand me? All 3 of them nodded. Go. They hurried away. She then noticed Marcus Webb was still at the nurse's station. He was 29 years old and probably never imagined his 2nd year of residency would look like this. Webb? She called out. He jumped. Yes. Ma'am, I am here. You have some trauma experience. I did. I finished a basic trauma rotation about 6 months ago. It is going to have to be enough. You are going to stay with Dr. Hennessy and Barnes until Vasquez arrives. You will not leave that room for any reason. You will not open that door for anyone until I or Paul give you the all clear. Can you handle that? Marcus glanced at the trauma bay doors, and then his eyes snapped back to Flora. He swallowed nervously. Yes. Then go. He disappeared. Flora looked back at Deborah. You need to go upstairs with them. Deborah shot her a look of pure indignation. Not a chance. Deborah. I have worked as a nurse in this hospital for 9 years, Flora Montgomery. If you think for one moment I am hiding in a supply closet while my ER is... Okay, Flora interrupted. Fine. Then stay at the station and keep your head down when things kick off. Kick off? Deborah repeated the words slowly. What exactly is about to kick off? Flora just held her gaze. To be perfectly honest with you, I do not know. That is the honest truth. Deborah took this in with the calm of someone who understood that medicine, much like life, rarely offered any certainties. Okay then, she said. What can I do to help? Flora opened her mouth to speak, but at that exact moment, Vance's radio came to life, its sound cutting through the quiet room. Colonel, we have got movement. The time was 2:38 in the morning. The first car sped into the south parking entrance. Reyes spotted it before the guards could even report it, because she had been watching the south-facing window. The instant its headlights cut across the lot, she was already moving. Vehicle approaching from the south, moving fast, she announced. Her voice was completely calm. There was no trace of fear or surprise. It was the clear, focused tone of a professional carrying out a mission. Colonel, the southern vehicle just broke through the barrier. O'Kane, give me a status report on the west. All clear on the west, O'Kane's voice crackled back. The maintenance road is totally empty. Baker, Chang, get to the south exit, now. Vance was already at the opening to the corridor. He realized Flora was standing just a few feet from him. He never heard her approach. It was a skill of hers that always managed to both annoy and impress him. They are creating a diversion, Flora said softly. They are showing us one car to distract us from another one. O'Kane reported the west is clear. That is exactly why they want you looking away from the west, she countered, her eyes fixed on his. The west maintenance road leads to the service entrance. It is not on any of the public maps of the hospital. They must have done their homework. They had 6 days to do it, she reminded him. Vance stared at her for a long second, then grabbed his radio. O'Kane, get inside that service corridor, right now. Forget the road, just get in there. A moment of static-filled silence followed. Sir, the corridor is locked, he responded. A loud thud echoed from somewhere deep within the hospital. It was not a gunshot. It was the heavy, mechanical sound of a door being pried open from the outside. From her post, Deborah whispered, that sound came from the loading dock. But Flora was already moving. Flora, hold on, Vance shouted after her. It was no use. She was already gone through a side door as his radio crackled to life again. Reyes reported that the vehicle in the south had stopped. 2 individuals were now walking toward the ambulance bay. They were being hit from 2 directions at once. Trapped in the middle, in a dimly lit service hallway of an Oregon hospital, Montgomery moved toward a sound no one could identify, but every single one of them knew it was a threat. It was 2:41 in the morning. The corridor was dark, the way service halls always are in the middle of the night. The 2 men inside were not using flashlights, moving only by the faint red glow from the exit signs. That was all the light they needed, but it was also all the light that Flora needed. She had no weapon. There was no way for her to get one, a fact she established within the first 30 seconds of the alarm. Every single move she made from this point on was based on that reality. But she had the building. She knew every inch of this hospital. They did not. She pressed her body flat against the wall where the service hall connected to the main supply corridor. She just listened. She heard 2 pairs of footsteps, moving slowly. They thought they were still undetected. They were heading for the pharmacy hall, which gave them a direct line to the emergency room. She did not bother to think about her options. There was not a decision to be made. There was only the next thing that had to be done. She slipped around the corner, moving toward the loading dock and away from the footsteps. She sprinted past the emergency floodlight panel and smacked it hard with her open palm. The corridor was suddenly blasted with brilliant light. She heard the men freeze, their sharp, surprised gasps revealing exactly where they were. She could hear them scrambling to react. She was already at the loading dock intercom, her finger on the button for every floor. Her voice came out steady, the voice she used when she took charge. This is a security alert. We have 2 intruders in the service level corridor. All staff, be on guard. A heavy thud slammed into the wall right next to her head. She dove behind a control panel and crawled to the left, staying low to the ground. She found cover behind a high rack of supplies. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her mind went to a different place. It was a cold, sharp, and focused state she had known for most of her life, before she chose to live differently. She had forgotten how deep the silence was down here. She heard the clear scrape of boots against the concrete floor. One man was advancing quickly. The other was hanging back, covering him. It was a standard two-person tactical move. She knew it well. She had trained for this very thing. A hand gripped the metal shelf beside her, making it rattle. Before he could topple it, she was already gone. She darted around the other side, moving fast and staying low. The man nearest to her only had a moment to realize she was not where he expected. In the next instant, she grabbed his arm, using his own forward motion to throw him completely off balance. He crashed hard onto the floor. His partner yelled his name. She was already slipping through the door at the end of the hall. The clock on the wall showed 2:44 in the morning. She burst into the emergency room from the stairwell, and every single person turned to look. Vance was by the ambulance bay with Reyes and two others handling new patients. His eyes found Flora's immediately. In that one silent look, they communicated more than most people do in a long talk. "I was in the service corridor," she reported. "There were two of them. One is down. The other either fled or is calling for more help." Reyes was already speaking into her radio. Harmon rushed over from across the room, his face pale with fear. "We have to start the extraction now. We can get Barnes on a—" Flora cut him short, saying, "You will not be making that call." She did not even glance his way. Her eyes were locked on the hallway she had just left. "Barnes is staying here. This whole place has been compromised. This hospital was compromised 6 days ago," she stated plainly. This time, she looked straight at Harmon. Whatever he saw in her eyes made him fall completely silent. "It was a security breach that you knew about, so you have no say in what happens now." A commotion erupted from the ambulance bay. It was the sound of Reyes shouting a sharp command into her radio. That was followed by the definite sound of a fight right outside the doors. The entire emergency room fell silent. The doors burst open, and OA stepped inside backward. He was holding a man in regular clothes, who fought him with all his might. "I got the second man from the hall," OA said, trying to catch his breath. "Baker has the other one secured outside." The man he held frantically looked around the room. His eyes were wide with panic, searching for any escape. He looked past the soldiers, the doctors, and even Vance. Then his eyes fell on Flora, and he froze. Flora stared right back at him. She spoke to Vance, her voice just a low whisper. "I know him." Vance turned to her. "From where?" She held Vance's gaze for a long, heavy moment. "From before." It was 2:51 in the morning. His name was Dolan. She remembered him as a logistics officer from a special task force. She had shaken his hand at a meeting 18 months before the crash that was supposed to have taken her life. He had an average face and a very professional attitude. Nothing about him back then suggested he was anything other than a good soldier. She had been so wrong. She could see it all now with perfect clarity. It was the kind of clarity that happens when one new fact makes you rethink every old memory and it all suddenly makes sense. "How long?" she asked him. He said nothing. "How long were you selling out our team?" She took one step closer. Owe's hand tightened on Dolan's arm, but Flora's voice was not angry. It was calm, direct, and controlled, which was much more frightening. "Was Kandahar your fault?" For a brief moment, a flicker of understanding crossed Dolan's face. "What happened in Kandahar?" Vance asked. Flora's eyes remained fixed on Dolan. "We had 3 agents at a location we were told was secure. Someone leaked their position." She let the words hang in the air. "One of our people never made it back." The emergency room fell completely silent. At the main desk, Deborah stood like a statue, her hands pressed firmly on the counter. Dolan finally found his voice. "But you were dead." The crash was officially confirmed. "You could not confirm anything," Flora retorted, "because nothing was there. I made certain that absolutely nothing would be left for you to find." At last, she turned to look at Vance. That crash was no accident. Vance could only stare back at her. "I arranged it," she confessed. "I knew we had a traitor. I just was not sure who it was. I had to vanish before they found me, she explained. She turned back to Dolan. I did not know it was you then, but I am sure of it now. Dolan's jaw was tight. You do not have any proof. I do not need any proof, Flora said calmly. You came here, to this hospital, in the middle of the night with a tactical team. The security video alone will start a very interesting talk. She gave a small nod to Oe. Get him out of my sight. Oe began to pull him away. Dolan fought back, but he was removed quickly. Vance was looking at Flora with an expression she had never seen. It was a look he probably reserved for very few people. You faked your own death, he said. It was not a question, but a fact he was trying to understand. Yes, she answered simply. Because you thought the team was compromised? Because the team was compromised, she corrected him gently. I just did not have the proof yet, and you never told me. She looked him directly in the eye. I did not know if the traitor was you. A deep silence grew between them, heavy with years of trust that had been shared. An uncomfortable quietness grew between two people who once trusted each other, but had just found the point where that trust broke. Vance spoke first. It was not me. I know that now, she admitted. After another second, he said, I am so sorry. She could hear the sincere regret in his voice, which made it both easier and harder to hear. I know you are, she replied softly. Deborah's voice broke the tension at the right time, a talent she had perfected. Vasquez is here, she announced. She came out of a hallway with a small, sharp-looking woman in her 50s. The newcomer pulled on some gloves, her calm eyes quickly assessing the chaotic scene. She had obviously been woken from a sound sleep, but it did not seem to annoy her. She needs to see Barnes now. Flora turned. The emergency room was a complete mess, full of people who would remember this night forever. But it was still her responsibility, her place. She started walking to the trauma bay. Flora, Vance called to her. She stopped, but did not turn around. We need to talk, he said. About what we do now. I know, she answered. She stood still for a second in the center of the room. The lights overhead cast a bright, unforgiving glow on everything. It was the kind of lighting hospitals use because there is no room for shadows. She felt the incredible weight of the night and of the past 3 years she spent as a ghost finally come to rest on her shoulders. She felt the weight of the last 90 minutes she spent fighting for Barnes's life. The name she gave up, the new person she became, and the empty feeling between them that never really went away. She felt the heavy pressure of it all. Then she stood up straight, covered the angel wing tattoo on her arm, and walked forward. A patient needed to be moved, a surgeon was waiting for an update, and the whole floor needed to be put back in order. Everything else would have to wait. The surgery had been going on for 1 hour and 43 minutes when Dr. Ranatada Vasquez came out. She pulled her mask down with the efficiency of someone who no longer tries to make bad news sound better. Flora was waiting right outside in the hall. She had not sat down once. She stood with her back to the wall, her arms down, her eyes fixed on the operating room doors. She had been standing in that spot since Barnes went inside, and a piece of her had stayed there with him. Vasquez met her gaze. He is out of surgery, she said. Flora did not say a word. Her eyes were locked on the surgeon's face. The blood vessel repairs are holding, Vasquez went on. The damage to his chest was bad, but we have it under control. He lost a lot of blood. She paused. But he is out, and his blood pressure is stable. Very stable. Not the type we have to keep adjusting. It was the kind of stability that meant his body was starting to win. Flora quietly breathed out. It was barely noticeable. But Vasquez, at 54 years old and a master at reading people, saw it. You did incredible work on him, Vasquez said. Your field care was excellent. Flora looked at her for a moment. My thanks to you, Renata. Vasquez studied her with the focused, professional gaze of a surgeon. She had just seen extraordinary talent in an extreme situation, and always acknowledged skill. Do you want to see him now? She asked. Not quite yet, Flora replied. I want to let him get some proper rest first. Vasquez gave a brief nod of agreement. He is going to be asking for you the moment he is awake. You should also know, whatever is going on between you two, he said your name just before the anesthetic took hold. Not Angel, he said Flora. She gave her a meaningful look. Just Flora. Flora tightened her lips and remained silent. Vasquez placed a solid, comforting hand on her shoulder and then walked on. Flora stood alone in the corridor for a full 30 seconds. She then gathered her composure, tugged down her sleeve, and went to find Vance. At 4:23 in the morning, she located him in the family waiting room. For the first time in hours, he was entirely by himself. He sat with his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped tightly before him. In that instant, he appeared less like a high-ranking officer and more like a weary traveler at the end of a very long journey. Flora sat in the chair opposite him without an invitation. He glanced up at her. "He is out of surgery," she informed him. Vasquez confirmed he is in stable condition. Vance shut his eyes for a couple of seconds. When they opened again, the colonel had mostly returned. "Good," he said, his voice now noticeably hoarse compared to how it sounded at 2 in the morning. "That is very good news. Harmon is now in federal custody," she continued, "as of roughly 40 minutes ago. The other 2 from the hallway are currently being processed." He looked down at his own hands. "There will be a formal investigation. A legitimate one this time. How far up the chain do you believe it reaches?" "We are not sure yet." He finally looked her in the eye. "High enough that your name is appearing in files where it shouldn't be. High enough that the entire official story from 3 years ago is being revised." Flora leaned back in her chair. The waiting area was completely empty, except for the 2 of them. Outside the window, the sky was just beginning to shift to gray above the trees. It was that pale light that comes before the sunrise, when the new day is still a complete unknown. "You are here because you want me to come back," she stated directly. "I am here because the investigation requires your official statement," Vance answered with care. "And the mission that Barnes and his team initiated is not yet complete." "That is not a direct answer." "No," he conceded, "it is not." He held her gaze. "I want you to return. I believe your skills are being wasted in this place." Flora countered. "I save people's lives here every single night. You save lives no matter where you are. That is not the issue." "Then what is the issue?" He paused. "The issue is whether this is the life you truly desire, or simply the one you took because you believed you had no other options." Flora held his gaze for a long moment. From further down the hall, she could hear Deborah's steady voice bringing calm back to the unit. The hospital was slowly returning to its normal rhythm after a chaotic night. She heard the beeping of monitors, the sound of footsteps, and the ding from a distant elevator. "I need to think about this," she said. Vance nodded his head. "I understand. And I will give you proper time. No phone calls in a week. No surprise visits in the parking garage." "I understand." She rose from her seat, and he stood as well. It was a formal habit from an older time, to stand when a conversation turned serious. They looked at one another, and Flora felt that complicated connection she shared with John Vance. He was her mentor, yet he held secrets and had just completely disrupted her new life. In a single night, he had upended everything. Things were never simple, but she had abandoned the idea of simple a long time ago. "You should get some sleep, Colonel," she said to him. "You as well," he responded. A faint smile nearly appeared. "My shift is over at 7. She turned around and started to leave. At 4:31 in the morning, Deborah was at the nurse's station with a cup of coffee. She had the look of a person who had managed a crisis and was now dealing with the inevitable paperwork. She looked up as Flora came near. "Barnes will be all right." It was a statement, not a question. "I assume Vasquez already told you?" "Vasquez tells me everything. We have been working together for 6 years. Deborah put her coffee mug down. "How are you managing?" Flora took the seat across from her. A deep exhaustion settled over her, the first she had felt through the entire night. It was not from a lack of sleep, but from the feeling of being truly seen after hiding for 3 years. "I honestly do not know yet," she confessed. Deborah took that answer without any pressure. She was the type of person who knew that the truth was more important than comfort, so she did not offer any false reassurances. Instead, she simply slid her own mug of coffee across the counter toward Flora. Flora just looked at the cup. She lifted it and took a small sip. "You are aware the staff will have some questions," Deborah said. Cassie is already guessing that you are a secret agent. Cassie is not entirely incorrect, Flora replied. I informed her you were a nurse. That is not entirely incorrect either. Deborah observed her for a moment. So which one will you choose to be now? Flora placed the mug back on the counter. Her gaze moved across the nurse's station, seeing the monitors, the charts, and the medicine binders she knew so well. She saw the list of patients on the main board. It was the ordinary, essential core of a place where frightened and injured people came to find help. I am just going to be me, Flora said, whatever that ends up being. Deborah nodded. That is a very good answer. You really believe so? It is the truthful one for this moment. And that is what is important. At 4:44 in the morning, Paul Hennessy discovered her in Supply Bay 3, restocking the shelves. He had seen her performing this same task before, but this time felt completely different. He simply stood in the doorway. She was aware of his presence but continued with her work. Vasquez confirmed he is expected to make a complete recovery, Paul said. I am aware. She also described what you did in there. The combat medicine techniques, how you modified the defibrillator, how you handled his injuries. He paused for a moment before adding more. She said that in her 22 years as a surgeon, she has never seen anything like it. Vasquez is being generous, Flora answered. Flora, the way he spoke, her name was different. It lacked his usual cautious, professional doctor tone from before. He was no longer concealing his emotions. This was now personal. Please, just speak with me. Not as a colleague or as another doctor. He paused. Speak with me as the man who spent an entire year attempting to get to know you, only to find out I did not know you in the slightest. Flora stopped what she was doing. She turned to face him. Paul Hennessy was a good man. She had known that from the beginning, and that was precisely why she had maintained her distance. Good men were owed the truth, and for the past 3 years, the truth was a luxury she could not afford. I was never planning to tell you, she said. Not because I did not want to. It was because I was protecting something. Were you protecting yourself? Yes. And everyone else here, he considered that. The accident 3 years ago. You were involved in it? Yes, and you survived it. I made sure it happened, she revealed, so I could disappear. I needed to protect my team from a danger I could not yet prove. He was quiet for a moment. That sounds like the most isolating thing in the entire world. Flora looked at him. That was not the response she had anticipated. She had prepared for numerous questions, for the doctor in him to try to analyze her. It was not really like that, she said softly. Paul's expression was open and tired, as if he was finally through with all pretenses. So, what is the next step? Vance wants you to return. He wants many things, but what is it that you want? She paused, not from uncertainty, but to ensure that her next words were absolutely true. I want to complete my shift, she stated. After that, I want to sleep. Then I will figure out everything else. He observed her for a second. May I ask one final question? You can ask. The photograph inside of your locker, he said. The one you believe no one knows about. Flora became perfectly still. Paul spoke gently. I saw it by mistake about 2 years ago. You left the door slightly ajar when Sims needed you urgently. I swear I was not trying to pry. He paused. I saw people in military uniforms, and you appeared. Different. Younger, perhaps, but you also seemed more genuine than you ever do here. He met her eyes. Were those the individuals you used to work with? Flora glanced down for a second before looking at him again. Yes, she confirmed. Were they good people? The majority of them were, she replied. Yes. Paul gave a slow nod. I just need you to understand, he said, that whatever you choose to do, whatever comes next for you, you were one of the good people here as well. He said it plainly, without trying to flatter her or be romantic, a tone she always avoided. It was delivered as a simple fact. You improved this hospital, and the patients were better off because of you. We were all better. He paused. I just had to let you know that somebody saw the real person, even while you were trying so hard to keep her hidden. Flora looked at him for a very long time. She thought of her distant parking space. The 6 words she would whisper before the start of every shift. The way she always kept her sleeves pulled down. The photograph hidden behind the door of locker 47. She remembered Michael Barnes speaking her name right before surgery. Not a code name, just Flora. She thought of Deborah Sims, who cleared the hallway of other patients without a single question. She had simply seen something in Flora's expression and took action. The very same woman who confronted a colonel and a director, telling them, "Both of you should be ashamed." And the person who slid a coffee cup over the counter at 4:30 in the morning without a word? She thought of Cassie, only 26 and nervous, who stayed and did exactly as she was told. And Ortega, who was always calm in a crisis. And Marcus Webb, who looked terrified but entered the trauma room anyway. She considered the quiet, predictable life she had made by deciding to be smaller than her true self each day. She questioned if being small truly kept her safe, and if being safe was the same as being right. And she wondered if doing good was a single decision, or something you had to choose to do over and over again every night. She then picked up the supply list she had set down. "You should head home for some rest, Paul," she mentioned. He gave a true smile. It was not his charming one for the hospital hallways. This was a smaller, real smile she almost never saw. "There is nobody else quite like you." "So they keep telling me," she answered. Then he left. At 5:02 in the morning, Barnes was conscious. This was earlier than Vasquez had anticipated, but Michael Barnes had always been ahead of schedule his entire life. He did not wake up slowly. He shot up from his sleep, completely aware, just as soldiers are taught. His hand automatically searched for a weapon that was not there. His eyes scanned the room before his mind fully registered his surroundings. Then everything came into focus. A white ceiling, medical machines, and a window that showed the first pale light of dawn. A nurse he did not recognize was checking his intravenous drip. He stared directly at the nurse and spoke. "Montgomery," he breathed. His voice was a raw, raspy sound. The nurse glanced up from her paperwork. "Sir, please try not to get agitated. You are in the recovery ward. You are completely safe now." "Flora Montgomery," he repeated, his voice stronger. "Where is she? I have to talk to her." He attempted to rise, but his body answered with a sharp jab of pain. "Sir, you must go and find her," he ordered. It was a command, not an ask. The nurse, sensing the seriousness, left the room immediately. At 5:09 that morning, Flora entered the recovery ward. Barnes saw her just as he had years before, inside a burning structure in a foreign country where she had no business being, when she had emerged like a phantom from the smoke. With his typical dry wit, he said, "Well, good. I was beginning to worry you would not make an appearance." He seemed smaller lying there in the hospital bed. Strong men often appear that way when their bodies fail them. But his eyes were the same, still sharp and weary, carrying the weight of a shared, difficult past that spanned 15 years. "You look awful," she said to him. She pulled a chair over to his bedside. "I was shot," he replied plainly. "What is your reason?" It was an exceptionally long night. He studied her carefully for a moment. "You saved my life yet again," he stated. "That makes twice now. I am capable of counting, Michael." "You are also still present," he noted. "In this building, in that uniform. This is my job now, of course." He studied her features intently, like a person who knew her well enough to see through any pretense. "You look changed." "You already told me that, but about my appearance." "No, I mean you seem different than when I was first admitted." He paused briefly. "You have the look of someone who just recalled who they truly are." Flora glanced at her hands. The angel wing tattoo on her wrist was just visible beneath her sleeve. She made no move to cover it. "Barnes," she began. "Montgomery, how did they locate you?" His jaw grew tense with fury. "Dolan. I have no doubt it was Dolan." "No, I mean, how did it all unfold?" "The mission summary," he clarified. "The evening before the op, everyone in that room was supposed to be vetted." He gazed up at the plain ceiling. Kandahar was his work as well, wasn't it? It was. He was silent for a considerable time. "Chen," he said, his voice quiet. Chen was the soldier who did not make it out of Kandahar. His name was a heavy weight she bore, much like the tattoo, present even when concealed. Yes, she confirmed gently. He shut his eyes, and then opened them once more. I searched for you a long time after the incident. I am aware you did. You could have reached out to me. I could not reach out to anyone, she responded. If I told even one person I trusted, I would have to be concerned about who they might talk to, and then who that person might talk to. Her voice trailed off. I was not aware of the full threat then. I was not able to take that chance. Did you know it was Dolan? I had a feeling we had a traitor among us. I just was never certain who it could be. She met his gaze directly. I am sorry that I was unable to tell you. He held her gaze for what seemed like an eternity. You never have to apologize for surviving, he said, his voice more gentle than before. You do not ever owe that apology to anyone. She looked at him, absorbing the deep meaning of his words. His compassion reached a place inside her she had not realized was still wounded. Vance has asked me to return to active service, she shared with him. I am aware. He continued to watch her. What is it that you want? That was the second time that question had been asked of her in the last hour. She remembered the simple response she had offered Paul. She looked at Barnes, the single person who was familiar with both her lives, the entire history of who she was before she became this woman in a hospital uniform. I want to finish running, she stated softly. I am just no longer certain which way I should be facing. Barnes was quiet for a moment, contemplating. Then he spoke. Do you know what I realized about you a long time ago? What would that be? You consistently see your choices as one or the other. To stay or to leave, the past or the future, a field medic or a hospital nurse. It is always this way or that way. He tried to adjust his position in the bed, and a look of pain flashed across his face. But you have been both of those individuals at once. Every single night you have reported to work in this place. You just refuse to acknowledge it. Flora remained silent. You did not disappear when you came here, he continued. You created something tangible, something that was entirely your own. He looked at her with a calm, assured expression. Your code name was never your identity. It was only a role. The same way the uniform is a role, the same as the tattoo is, the same as everything else. She glanced down at the angel wing on her wrist. She recalled the evening she had it done, by herself in an unfamiliar city, in a tattoo shop that smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. She had convinced herself it was a tribute, a method for saying farewell to Angel 6 before she transformed into someone else. But sitting in that chair at 5 a.m, she understood she was mistaken. It was not a farewell. It was a connection, evidence that the person from before the crash and the person after were the very same woman. Nothing she had ever done had canceled out another piece of herself. She had not left a part of her spirit behind in that thick smoke. She had brought every part of it with her. At 8 a.m, Vance was in the hospital hallway, wearing his overcoat, preparing to go, when Flora approached him. He noticed a new resolve in her expression that made him pause and wait for her to speak. I will provide my official statement, she declared. Everything I am aware of about Dolan, the security breaches, and Kandahar, I will share all of it. She looked directly at him. However, the official file must reflect that I am a witness, not a recovered operative. I am a civilian nurse who was on site during an event. That is what the record will state. Vance observed her for a moment, and then he inquired, and what will happen after the inquiry is over? After the inquiry is over, she said again, I will consider what I will do next. That is not an affirmation. No, she concurred, but it is not a refusal either. He thought about her statement for a long while. Then, he offered his hand to her. She looked at it, then accepted it and shook it with confidence. It was a firm, sincere handshake between two people who had reached an understanding without further discussion. He mentioned there was one final detail. Flora waited for him to elaborate. He informed her that her colleagues, the other nurses, and the doctor would require a security debriefing. They would need to be instructed on what they could discuss about that night. He paused, ensuring she grasped the situation, and assured her he would handle it with care. Flora pictured Deborah, who moved patients from the walls based on pure reflex and stood up to generals with no need for recognition. She pictured Paul in the entrance of Bay 3 at 4:40 in the morning, acknowledging how hard he saw her work. She pictured Ortega, Cassie, and Marcus Webb, all of whom had safely made it through the night. "They are good people," she stated. "They will be okay. I am certain of it," Vance replied. "They have an excellent nurse." He started to walk away. At the exit, he glanced back at her one final time. It was only a brief glance, as if he wanted to commit the moment to memory, then he was gone. She returned to her duties. That was the simplest description for her next action. She went back to her job. Her shift wasn't over until 7, and there were patients who required her attention. There was a hospital ward to oversee and a status chart that needed to be updated. It was the ordinary, essential, and continuous work of a place where injured people came to get well. Deborah met her at the nurses' station and gave her a fresh stack of charts without speaking. Deborah understood that the best thing for a person who just endured a conflict was to be given a task. Ortega was occupied with replenishing medical supplies. Cassie was attending to a new arrival, a 70-year-old man with a suspected hip fracture who was being stoic in the way older men often are, as if voicing pain were a weakness. Flora approached him first. She told him her name, her voice as calm and even as ever. She asked for his, listening to his reply with her full and complete attention. Flora knew the man in front of her was the only thing that mattered in that moment. His name was Gerald. He was 72 years old and had fallen while letting his dog out. Flora asked, "Is your dog okay?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "Yes," he replied. It startled him, though. "He always sits by the door for me when I go out." She offered a warm smile. "He sounds like a very good dog. Let us get you fixed up so you can get back home to him." Gerald studied her face for a moment. "You are a good nurse," he said, with the simple sincerity of a man who never wasted words. Flora looked him in the eye. "Thank you, Gerald," she said, and she truly meant it. At 6:58 in the morning, only a minute before the shift change, Flora Montgomery was at the station finishing her last report. The emergency room had settled into its normal rhythm. It was that unique, productive, quiet that follows a crisis after everyone has moved on. That was the way this job worked, a cycle that never really ended. She glanced at the patient board. 12 names were on it, and 3 were set to be discharged. Barnstable was safely in recovery. Dolan was in federal hands, somewhere she did not need to worry about. Vance was on a flight. She looked down at the sleeve of her scrubs, and then, with slow purpose, she pushed it all the way to her elbow. It was a deliberate choice, not a casual gesture. The angel wing tattoo was still there. It had deep, bold lines, sharp feathers, and the little imperfections of something done by hand. She had not really examined it in a long time, the way you stop seeing things that are in front of you every day, but now she looked at it directly, the way Barnes had taught her to face things without backing down. It was not a symbol of an ending. It was never an ending. It was a link between two parts of her life, both equally real, belonging to a single person who had survived chaos and 3 years of hiding to make it through the night. Deborah came and stood next to her. She saw the tattoo, but did not comment. "It was a good shift," Deborah said instead. Flora gave her a confused look. "It was a terrible shift." Deborah replied simply, "Those still count as shifts, and they can still be good." Flora slowly slid her sleeve back down. But then, a moment later, she pushed it up again. As the day team walked in, Flora Montgomery, night nurse and former combat medic Angel 6, signed out at 7:03 in the morning. She walked to her car and just sat. In the soft morning light, she took a deep breath. Tears were not something that came easily to her, and the night's events had not changed that. She pulled the old photograph from her pocket. She had retrieved it from locker 47 before leaving. It no longer needed to be hidden. The photo showed 7 soldiers in uniform, squinting against the bright sun in a place that was hot, dusty, and a whole world away from Oregon. Michael Barnes was second from the left, flashing the mischievous grin that always landed him in trouble. She was third from the right, looking straight into the camera. Her eyes were those of someone who had no clue what her future would be. In that one photo, she was just herself, plain and simple. She looked at the picture for a very long time. Then, she placed it on her dashboard where the sun could reach it and started the car. For 3 long years, Flora Montgomery had lived as if being invisible was the only thing that could keep her safe. She finally understood how wrong she had been. It was not because the night had defeated her or taken something that could never be replaced. It was because the night had proven that the exact opposite was true. It had revealed that every part of her past was still inside her, fully active, and that she was the same person she had always been. No amount of quiet living or keeping her distance could ever change her true nature. She was Flora Montgomery. She was Angel 6. She was the woman who had fled a chaotic life to start over in a peaceful suburban hospital, saving people the only way she knew how. She did her job with her whole heart, never holding back, with hands that were always perfectly still. She was all of those things at the same time. She had been that person all along, and now she was completely done with hiding.